The big tech and the social media companies played a big role during last year's election and this impeachment. So a lot of people are very concerned about their behavior and wondering why they become so powerful. So from your point of view, how did we come to this stage?
Well, when all this started 30 years ago, this is what Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Sergey Brin and Larry Ellison, all of those people, they basically developed a very good strategy. They went to the right, the Republicans in Congress and the conservative thinkers in think tanks and in the media, and they said this: you should like us. We're entrepreneurs. We're the Rockefellers or the Edisons or the Mellons of the 20th century and soon to be the 21st century. And we're free market entrepreneurs, and we're going to make so much money for the United States, and we're going to take the lead in Google and Facebook, Apple. And therefore, you should give us a pass if we have to monopolize markets or now and then have cartels or have trust, because we represent great business. And then they went to the left and they said, hey, we've told these Republicans and these conservatives that we're up by the bootstrap conservative entrepreneurs that are good for America, but we're going to give all the money to you for political reasons, 93%, 95%. So you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't be like 19th century muckrakers, Sinclair Lewis, Frank Norris, those guys who tried to break up the trust, and they did. Standard Oil, the Pacific Union Railroads. Don't do that. Don't hate corporations, because the money is going to go to you. And between playing them off and talking out of both sides of their mouth, they became a monopoly, so that Google controls 90% of the searches, and therefore they manipulate them. So if I say Donald Trump's greatest achievements, if I Google that, the first 20 pages are going to be his achievement was he ruined political discourse. He destroyed they're not going to be achievements. And I'll have to go down to search number 45 or worse. And so they manipulate that. And they deplatform people and they cancel them. So they massage the social media for a preconceived result. And they're monopolies. And now to break them up the way that we have in the past would require a bipartisan effort. I think the Republicans have woken up and said, you know what, these guys lied to us. And they are monopolies. And we shouldn't be proud of that monopolizing tendency. But the left, all of a sudden, the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren left are saying, now that I think about it, Mark Zuckerberg gave $350 million to pre-selected Democratic precincts in key electoral states to get out the vote, and gave it to the government to target particular constituencies. And that may have helped us win the election. Do we really want to go after him? And that's how they got this power. They're very manipulative. They're very cynical. And also remember that Silicon Valley is 50 square miles in radius. And about 8 companies have $6 trillion in market capitalization. And I think this year, if we include Amazon from Seattle, 100 million Amazon made. And I think Apple made a little bit more, over 100 million. Billion, 100 billion. In sales. So what I'm getting at is we're looking at a magnitude of wealth that we've never seen in the history of civilization. So if you're a young person and you graduate with an electrical engineering degree from Stanford, you have the possibility to go to work for one of those guys for $350,400, and your ideology will reflect that of your employer. And if you're a politician and you want to ban a monopoly between YouTube and Facebook, just to take an example, or Google or whatever, then you're faced with this question: do I want to have my opponent in the next primary funded to $3 or $4 billion versus none for me? And so that's where we are. They use that money so freely, and they have so much of it that it provides a deterrent effect.
So, do you think their strategy was part of the leftist agenda, or they just develop it along the way?
Oh, I think they're leftist. I think what's happened in all of our major institutions that the left focused on them, and they created incentives of rewards and punishment. Once they got a hold of Silicon Valley and they could tweet and social media, they pretty much won the war. So if you're a Hollywood actress and you want a part in a great movie, and the director has to choose, if you go onto Twitter or Facebook and talk about the oppressed and George Floyd, and you're going to get that job. You're going to get that role over an actress who might say, you know, I don't like Donald Trump, but I like his agenda. If you do that, you're done. If you, same thing in the NBA, if you take a knee, you're going to get a big Nike endorsement. If you don't take a knee, you're going to have to apologize at some point. If you criticize China, you're going to have to apologize because that's where the money is. And the same thing's true, as I just mentioned, where I am. So most of my colleagues at Stanford University are not content to disagree with some of us at the Hoover Institution. They want to destroy our careers. And so that means, do you really want to fight them or do you want to join them? A lot of people join them. And the same is true. So I've talked about academia, social media. Same is true at Wall Street. Is your company going to be woke? You saw the commercials on the Super Bowl. They were all ideological. Here was Bruce Springsteen in a Jeep. Here's a guy from New Jersey, an urbanite, with a ring in his ear, leftist. And he's riding around in a sort of out west like he's a cowboy saying we all got to be unite. But he's a person who said that he would go to Australia and get away from Trump's America, and said Trump was a nightmare and did all he could for 4 years to divide America. But when he says unite, it's sort of like the Orwellian Big Brother on the TV screen. Yes, unite because now we have power and we want you to have our agenda. And we know what that agenda is. It's open borders. It's reset with China. It's the ending of fossil fuels, which will empower the Arab nations and Iran and Russia. It is the politically correct culture. It's radical abortion. It's all of those things. And he's saying unite behind that. He doesn't say you lost and we're going to drive this down your throat, but that's what he means. And so that's the corporation, the corporate boardroom is woke. If you can think of a major institution that's not, universities, foundations, K through 12. You see what's happening in the San Francisco School District, Teachers Union. I can't think of one major institution that's not controlled by the hard left.
Given the current situation and the thinking about the future, where do you think the hope is to deal with the communist China and stop the hard left and the communism in the United States?
You know, I'm going to say something kind of controversial. I think the hope for America are the 50 million people who weren't born here. I understand that people coming from very poor areas, they depend on the Democrats for help. But a lot of three and four and five generation Americans have become complacent. 40% of them are the problem. They're left wing, the bi-coastal elite. But when I look out where I live and I see first generation people from Mexico, they're trying to start businesses, they believe in religion, they're trying to put their children, they're trying to have Catholic exegesis and Bible reading, they work hard, they do not like transgendered restrooms, they do not like high gasoline prices. They do not like shutting down the source of the natural gas that keeps them warm. They do not like some nasal voice person lecturing them about confessing their privilege. They do not like trying to see whether their child has more heft in affirmative action than a black child or an Asian child or whatever. And so if I am starting to see the very beginning of Black Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans say, you know, I came to this country to be free. I came to this country to be prosperous. I came to this country to be secure. and who is destroying it? Who is rioting? Who is taxing me and regulating me to death and using this green agenda to destroy me? And who is trying to infringe on my free expression? It's these crazy leftist Americans. So that's my hope.
Actually, that's exactly why we started our English channel right after the election, because our Chinese audience just urged us, saying we need to talk to Americans.
I think so. I think that because what happens is, after about 2 or 3 generations, if you look at the Asian community, and I know that's an inexact rubric that includes everybody from Southeast Asia to Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan. But if you look at that if you look at that rubric, it's about 60-40 left wing. But if you look at it in a different lens and look at first generation, it tends to be far more conservative, because it still came here for a particular set of ideals. And it was very successful, but it's very hard to transmit to the second and third generation who grew up in opulence or affluence or leisure their parents never enjoyed, for them to see how important those are, because they want to belong to the popular culture. Every new immigrant's grandchild says, I want to be cool and hang out with a guy who likes LeBron, or I want to be cool and get on Twitter and cancel that guy out, or I want to be cool and make fun of that pot-bellied guy from Michigan and call him a white supremacist. So that's the temptation. But I feel that eventually our immigrants are going to have to remind America, hey, you guys, we didn't come here for this. We came here for the Constitution, and you guys are betraying the Constitution, not us. We're going to remind you what it is. So I would like to see the immigrant community step up and say, we love America, that's why we came here, and we think it's our role to remind people of it. And it's kind of interesting. We have forgot the civil rights movement, because now the BLM movement says, it's racist. It was always racist. We got to throw it away. But if you look at actually what the civil rights leaders, Medgar Evers or Martin Luther King, said in the 1960s, or even earlier with Frederick Douglass they never said what the modern, we want to have racial categories that are separate, or our color matters. It was always the content of your character, not the color of your skin. But more importantly, they said, hey, white America, you have a wonderful declaration, all men are created equal. You have a wonderful constitution where the word black or white is not mentioned. There's something about 3/5 of servants, but that was only because the Confederate wanted, credit and representation for slaves, and you tried to stop that and had a compromise. But your documents are perfect, but you never lived up to them. So you have discrimination against African Americans. So what we're asking you is, go back to what Hamilton and Madison envisioned and man up to it, live up to their ideals. And so that's what we're not doing right now. We're not living up to free speech. We're not living up to free expression of the First Amendment. We're not living up to the free use of firearms, if you choose, under the Second Amendment, and due process under the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment. So I think immigrant communities should say, we came here not because we particularly liked a particular race or a particular person. We like your system. We like the Constitution. And we're going to damn sure make sure that we all follow it. And I think that would be a very healthy message.
Actually, some first-generation immigrants don't have a lot of knowledge about the U.S. Constitution and the history of Western civilization and its culture. So we think it's very important to provide them some related knowledge and information.
Yes, I think it would be very valuable to take that example of the Chinese immigrant community, to have bilingual documents online of the Constitution, what their rights are. And the problem is that the public schools are anti-constitutional, and most immigrants are not in a financial position for the first generation. Some are, but not all, to put their children in either homeschool or traditional private schools or parochial schools where it's more traditional. So they're faced with this dilemma that their children come home and said, hey, Dad, hey, Mom, you should hear what the teacher told me. And it's contrary to their own philosophy, and they have no way of combating it. So it's, it's something that people, if we look right now, who are the most important people who are trying to save us from Chinese communism in the government, or were in the government, or advisors to government, it was people like Miles Yu at the State Department, the confidant of Secretary Pompeo, or Gordon Chang of half Chinese extraction. They were the people who were saying, hey, you Americans are really naive. I've lived there, or my family's from there, and you have no idea what these people do. It has nothing to do with race. It's an ideology that infected Europe, infected Russia, infected Cuba, and unfortunately infected China. And if you go down that road, I can tell you where it's going to end up. It's going to end up in Venezuela. It's going to be misery. So please don't do it. And so I think immigrants have a vital role, especially in the Chinese case, because a great challenge to the world in general, the United States in particular, is going to be communist China, because they have so many people and they have so brainwashed them, and they have social electronic control of them. It's almost impossible for the average Chinese citizen inside China to express dissident views. And so the expatriate Chinese community is very valuable to warn people. And they can say things that are very valuable. They can say, if you want to criticize the Chinese government and how it distorted or corrupted the World Health Organization, that is not racist, that's not xenophobic. We do it too. It's not a matter of race. So there's a critical role to play. And especially because the Chinese immigrant community, among many immigrant communities, but maybe singularly, has trust in free enterprise. They inculcate in their community, open a business, open a construction company, open shipping transport, open something, but don't look toward government to get a billet. Go become an orthodontist or a radiologist or a doctor, a professional or a business, but don't think that you should just stay home and have the government. And that's very valuable to remind us that they're an entrepreneurial, and that my point is, if you're entrepreneurial and you're successful, then you're also independent and autonomous, and people don't have leverages or influences over you. And so I think that's one of the reasons why you have a loud and opinionated and brave Chinese community, and you should.
Well, Professor Hanson, it's such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you.